Welcome everybody, welcome Anna. I'm very excited to have this seminar today, and precisely because it was on International Women's Day. So I've invited Anna Terra Amorim-Maia to join us. Anna has a background in environmental engineering and environmental studies, and she has been looking at things such as green gentrification and climate adaptation planning from an intersectional perspective. And for her seminar today, she promised to look at the kind of interconnectedness between the social and environmental injustices that are shaping the cities and our cities today, and propose also some ideas of how we can tackle them. So I'm very excited that she has joined us for our 15th Creatures seminar. And I think it's also a really nice addition to this series of events that we have been talking with different people about, different ways that we can think and we can transform towards more both eco-social, sustainable futures. So welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for coming. And I won't say anything more. I will just try to catch up as much, to recover as much of the time as we can. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. I really appreciate your invitation and you being here today. It's true, it looks like we're all women here. It's funny that sometimes, or not sometimes, usually when there is gender or feminist or woman on the title, men just feel intimidated or frightened, I don't know, or they think it's, something for women to discuss. Maybe they just feel unwelcome. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Yes, I can. So I'll start sharing my presentation. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Yes, so the topic, the title of the presentation that I prepared is At the Intersection of Climate and Gender Justice, Creative Designs for Inclusive Climate Action. As Christina said, my name is Anna Terra Amorim-Maia, and I am a PhD candidate at the Barcelona Lab for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability, which is part of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And I would like to start this presentation by mentioning the latest IPCC report, which was released just last week. And this one talks particularly about climate change, its impacts, vulnerability, and also adaptation. And I took some extracts from the summary for policymakers. So they say that it's unequivocal that human-induced climate change, including more frequent and intense extreme events, has caused widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and to people, which has been confirmed to be beyond just natural climate variability. And the report also says that across sectors and regions, the most vulnerable people and systems have been observed to be the most disproportionately affected. So who are these most vulnerable people? The report goes further and says that vulnerability of ecosystems and people differs substantially among and within regions, but it is also driven by patterns of intersecting socioeconomic development, unsustainable ocean and land use, also processes of marginalization, historical and ongoing patterns of inequity, and colonialism, which I think it is a first for IPCC, and it's quite radical for them to mention colonialism at this stage, which is interesting. And within populations particularly, they mentioned that those that are the most vulnerable are the economically and socially marginalized. And they mentioned in particular the poor, women, children, the elderly, indigenous populations as well. And it's interesting that they do say that they are vulnerable because of a combination of factors, including gender divisions of paid and unpaid labor. The report also has a specific cross-chapter about women and about how gender factors impact women's vulnerability to climate change, including women's health, livelihoods, and well-being. It says that women are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including being more affected by droughts and floods, being more susceptible to diseases and malnutrition, and also that they suffer more challenges, mental health challenges related to trauma associated with extreme weather events, loss of their livelihoods and culture. Women tend to be less included in decision-making processes related to climate action, and their knowledges, their values, and their ways of living and knowing tend to be less represented in climate policies and climate programs. However, it is obviously not all women, and it's not only women, and it can be counterproductive to put all women into a box and tag it as vulnerable, right? And it can be disempowering for women and for all of those who struggle with climate vulnerability. So this is where the concept of intersectionality comes in handy for us. Intersectionality was coined by a Black feminist scholar called Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. And in her words, it is the interconnected nature of social categorizations as they apply to a given individual or group, which overlap, creating unique systems of disadvantage and discrimination. So Kimberly, she realized that the struggles of poor women of color in the United States in the 1980s, they fell through the cracks of multiple fights. For example, the Black and anti-racist movement, and which was mostly led by Black men, and the feminist movement, which was back then mostly led by American middle class white women who were trying to enter the job market. Whereas poor women of color, they were already working, though in precarious conditions. They suffered discrimination because they were Black, but on top of that, they suffered intersecting forms of oppression because they were also women and because they were also poor. So in climate change, from a climate change perspective, these vulnerabilities, they vary not only because of the geographical location, but they are also shaped by these intersecting processes of marginalization. So for example, here in this pyramid, you see they include gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, income, age, migrant status, and disability. And these all compound risks to climate change impacts, and they can exacerbate existing inequalities, and they can also create further injustices. And a quick note about climate adaptation. The latest IPCC report does mention that current adaptation strategies, they still do not sufficiently include the underlying social determinants of human vulnerability, such as gender and ethnicity. And there are very few examples of successful integration of gender and other inequalities in climate policies to address climate vulnerabilities and also questions of social justice. So what this means is that these compounding risks and these intersecting vulnerabilities, they still remain overlooked in most climate actions, or they are addressed independently of the other climate actions. So we see cities that are tackling gender inequalities, other cities are tackling racism, but is not part of an integrated or a holistic approach to really tackling general social and climate inequalities and vulnerabilities. So in this, this is a brief note on urban planning that I think it is useful for our activity that we'll do soon. So urban planning, mostly in capitalist global north cities, it has been mostly designed by men and for men. So it has historically responded to the experiences and needs of a male subject, and also to the economic exploitation of territories and bodies. So this has translated, for example, into mobility and transport networks, which are designed mainly for private vehicles and for the transport of goods. It is also illustrated by architecture that minimizes the spaces available for caring activities, and also by strategic planning that is unrelated to people's everyday lives. So what we see is, for example, specific zonings in cities where the residential areas are very isolated from the downtown areas where people go to work, but they're also far away from the basic facilities that people need in their daily lives, such as supermarkets, markets, schools, hospitals, sports centers. And this has promoted the exclusion of women and also other minorities from urban spaces, and has confined them to the domestic sphere of the house and also to their reproductive functions. And a counter model to that neoliberal and patriarchal model of city is a rising movement, which is called urban feminism. A feminist urbanism, or urban planning with a gender perspective. And what it is basically, is trying to develop a model of a caring city, which puts the needs of diverse and complex populations at the center of urban decisions. And it also responds to real situations and people instead of cold and universal statistics. So in this vein, this year, I published a paper together with my supervisors in this journal called Urban Climate. And this paper is called Intersectional Climate Justice, a conceptual pathway for bridging adaptation planning, transformative action, and social equity. And it is a very long paper, but basically we propose 5 subcomponents or 5 actions that we deem that cities must adopt to operationalize intersectional thinking into climate action in cities. And I'll go briefly over them, these 5 actions. So the first one is to tackle economic reinforcers of racial and gender inequalities. Because as I said, the idea of intersectionality is intrinsically related to racial and gender inequalities, or to this main intersection. So what we suggest here is that cities recognize the historical devaluation of female and of non-white bodies and its assimilation into the economy. The next slide will have some examples so that we can better visualize this. The second action is to redress the drivers of differential vulnerabilities. So this means considering the compounding risks of climate change, but also existing urban vulnerabilities and social inequalities, which can reproduce injustices. The third one is to take politics of care seriously, which means rethinking urban planning from a care perspective, recognizing socially and economically the reproductive work that keeps the world alive. The fourth one is to adopt place-based and place-making approaches. So recognizing traditional, local, situated knowledge, which arises from diverse and often invisible experiences and populations. And the fifth subcomponent that we propose is to promote cross-identity and cross-vulnerability climate activism to build community resilience. So this means fostering cross-identity forms of activism to empower local communities so that they can really lead the change that they want to see. So to ground us a little bit further, I bring 5 examples from Barcelona and what it is doing. And with that, I don't mean that Barcelona is doing all of them in an integrated manner, integrated fashion alongside climate actions, but it is really showing some progressive policies and progressive programs that I think other cities could get inspired by. So, and the first one, which is to tackle economic reinforcers of racial and gender inequalities, Barcelona just launched at the end of last year its second plan for gender justice, which aims to add a gender perspective to all institutional and organizational processes, also to the economy of the city and to urban planning. So also to the way that the neighborhoods are thought and designed. But as you can see, Barcelona doesn't really have any policies related to racial injustices or any anti-racist policy at this point. For the second one, which is to redress the drivers of differential vulnerabilities, Barcelona has a strong commitment to promoting housing stability and also inclusive greening. So they are trying to increase as much as possible the presence and the accessibility of green spaces, while at the same time combating green gentrification. So they are promoting policies and programs that that promote house affordability and stability. For the third one, which is to take politics of care seriously, Barcelona launched a governmental bill for democratizing care work. It is their aim to become a pioneering caring city and to promote a more fair distribution and responsibility of care work, so that care can be given and received equally by all members of society, and also giving value to self-care. The fourth one, to adopt place-based approaches, Barcelona has an interesting project, which is called Climate Shelters in Schools. So it applied a micro-local model of governance, which meant that the students of the schools co-designed these spaces together with their parents, with the teachers, and with the staff of the school to transform their schoolyards and also parts of the buildings, which were considered vulnerable to heat, into real cool islands that were open to the whole neighborhoods throughout the summer. And the fifth one, to promote cross-identity forms of climate activism, Barcelona has a very interesting project, which is the Vacant Lots Plan, which allows nonprofit entities such as neighborhood associations and local NGOs to lease disused lands for temporary use, so that they can create community spaces for various purposes. So they have been using these spaces to build urban gardens, for therapeutic purposes, for environmental education, also green roofs. So this has also been a very interesting project, although it is for temporary use and usually is only 2 years. And then these nonprofits associations needs to let the spaces go. And another project that Barcelona is trailblazing pretty much is the creation of climate shelters or climate refuges. So what they are in the Barcelona context, they are facilities and urban parks which can shelter vulnerable populations and provide relief from extreme weather. But here is particularly extreme heat and heat waves. So if there are green areas, they need to have enough shading provided by trees. And if they're indoor spaces, they need to be at least 26 degrees Celsius, not at least, maximum 26 degrees Celsius during the summer. They need to have a water fountain, a public bathroom, and also spaces for people to sit. So these spaces have been identified. Barcelona already has 155 spaces identified as climate refuges, and they are mostly libraries, sports centers, sports pavilions, civic centers, museums, some schools. What Barcelona is doing, however, is repurposing existing spaces into climate shelters, not really designing new spaces. But what I wanted to do here with you is, given all of this that I talked about, I wanted to try to create a climate shelter or a climate refuge with an intersectional perspective, with the feminist urbanism perspective with you. So if you were to create a climate refuge with an intersectional perspective, or a place where you and your community could go, this means you can go with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors, with your pets, to take shelter during extreme weather events, but also a place that is open to the whole neighborhood year round. How would that place look like? How would you design that place? And I don't know where people here are located, but I invite you to think specifically about your city. So obviously some cities are more vulnerable to floods and others more vulnerable to wildfires or heat or cold. But think about your city. If you won a prize by your city council to design a climate shelter, how would it be? And I'm going to copy this and I will paste the link here. Hopefully this works because it is the first time I use this quiz maker. But let's see. I'll share my screen as well. But where is here? Chrome. Can people see the quiz in your own browsers? Okay, great. There's a chat. It's really unstable. I hope you'll be able to share the recording. Ah, yes. That's not up to me, but, but I'm okay with that. Okay, so the first question, if you could design this climate shelter in your city, for what extreme weather event would you design this space? Would it be, and here you can choose more than one option, as many as you want. So would it be for excessive cold and cold waves? In your case, would it be more for heat and heat waves, for protecting people from storms and floods, wildfire, or other? I'm not gonna vote on any here, just let you guys see. The next one, you can only choose one. So are you thinking of an indoor space or an outdoor space? Or would you rather build a place that is both indoors and outdoors? And the next question, regarding the cooling, the heating, or the shading, how would you like that to be? Would it be more natural? So with vegetations, with vegetation, landscaping, trees? Would it be, or urban garden, for example? Would it be more technological because that's what's more appropriate for a city? So with air conditioning or interior ventilators or heating? Or do you need a roof? So green roof, reflective roof, or some awning? Okay, so apart from the protection from extreme weather events, which other benefits do you think these spaces could bring to people's daily lives? So any other activities that you think these spaces could provide? For example, access to green space and nature, if your space is open. There's another chat. Or would you like, this is not either or, you can check all that apply, all that you think are significant for your personal climate shelter. So would you like to provide cultural and artistic activities or social activities, training and educational activities such as courses, capacity building, environmental education, activities and resources related to care, for example, community caring groups or support groups, recreational activities, concerts or sports or running tracks, it's really up to you, or socioeconomic activities, for example, a market or activities of social and solidarity economy, circular economy, or others. So here you can also use your creativity. And this one, if the city council allowed you to bring 3 more people to the table or 3 more perspectives, who would you choose to accompany you in this project? And I'm sure this list is not exhaustive, so you can also propose others, but I just said here, for example, architects, artists, members from civil society organizations, climate experts, elderly to bring their unique insights, environmental experts, ethnic minorities, indigenous peoples, investors who could fund your project, local communities, people with disabilities, policymakers, urban planners, women, youth. So if you could choose 3, who would you like to bring to the table to co-design this space with you? Thank you. And okay, finally, how would you ensure, and this is open-ended, how would you ensure that women and other minorities feel welcome to your climate shelter and also safe? So I can give you guys maybe a minute so that people from different backgrounds, different classes, different ages, and women in particular, how would you make them feel welcome and safe in this space? And finally, I don't know if you need another second, but this is already the final question. Would you add any other personal touches? And I'll give people a couple of minutes and then let's see the results. Should I bring up the results? Yes? Okay, let's see. Hopefully this is gonna work. Yes. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Wow, equally excessive cold and cold waves and excessive heat and heat waves, but mostly for storms and floods. Okay, this is very interesting. So this would probably be a shelter to protect people from storms and floods, mostly. Ooh, 40% indoors, 40% outdoors. That's also very interesting. The cooling and heating, same. 31% natural with vegetation and trees, 31% technological, and 23% roofing. It's very divided. I want to really see the discussions we're going to have to understand people's thinking behind these. Floating infrastructures. Okay, that's interesting. Apart from extreme weather, which other benefits could these spaces bring to people's daily lives? Let's see if we have a winner. Not really, but recreational activities and social activities were the most popular, both with, no. Need to go. Okay, Tuli, thank you. Thank you. No, sorry. Yeah, recreation activities and social activities, both with 4 people. Those were the most popular. And we have here energy generating activities and water storage. I want to understand what that is, energy generating activities. Is it people generating activity themselves, generating energy themselves? That's interesting. And knowledge, okay. Most people said, interesting, local communities. That's by far the champion, 27%. But we also have artists with 13% and indigenous peoples with 13. I think those were the mostly voted. Oh, and urban planners and women. Okay, so we'll build a space with urban planners, with women, with local communities, indigenous peoples, and artists. Oh, this is going to be interesting. What about the other? I don't really see the other. Oh, maybe I don't have access to the full results of my own quiz. I can't see the free answers and the personal touches. Yeah, I can't see them either. Perhaps we can share them here. As I said, this is the first time that I use that platform, so I apologize. I don't see the open-ended questions, but perhaps that we can share here what are the personal touches that you would add, and also how would you ensure that women and other minorities would feel welcome and safe in your designed climate shelter? If anyone would like to share.
Lara, go ahead. You want an outdoor kitchen?
Yeah, for my personal touch, I would like an outdoor kitchen. They have one at Spitalfield City Farm where I've worked, and it was just a delightful, spent some delightful time sitting there eating cucumbers fresh from the flower beds and just talking. just a really wonderful place in like a permaculture garden. So the structure is like with the roof collecting the water and putting it out, and then the kitchen is part of the garden, part of that rainwater catcher. So it's like this nice, like multi-purpose thing.
Wow, that's lovely. And how do you have a stove or an oven?
Yeah, I think it does have a stove.
Well, Spitalfields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have two kitchens actually. One kind of near the front where they have access to like more running water and bathrooms, and then this one is like right out in the middle of the garden. I'll find the link and share the farm website.
Please do. Thank you.
Anne, you want to go next?
Oh, hi, yeah. Now it's... Can you go silent? Right. Sorry, just that I was speaking through my machine and that was perhaps a bit stupid. Anyway, I was just suggesting that it would be really good to have a chance that we kind of keep on co-creating the refuge, even when using it, rather than just having it as something that has arrived kind of finished, because then people who are actually seeking refuge can also feel that they're contributing to something which is helping themselves and others. Because I think the point where you arrive in that kind of space can feel very vulnerable. And although you might initially just need shelter, then the idea that if you're there, you can actually be working on it seems quite appealing.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid input to make, this is particularly to make them feel welcome, right? That's great. Thank you.
Well, my refuge was more, I was more thinking how a lot of the climate adaptation infrastructure tends to be like really big in scale and like occupy a lot of space. And that and I was thinking how we can make that like smaller in scale so that people can understand, but also you know, can become more accessible and more useful for other activities as well. So for example, like here in the Netherlands, there is this program that is called like Room for the River. So it's basically like huge floodplains that they are able to absorb, you know, like extra water volume and avoid like flooding cities. But I was thinking how this, you know, huge land that is required to be reserved for this, like, you know, how it could maybe be split into like smaller, you know, like water tanks that could be part of the cities. Then they could function as like, you know, potentially like water storage, or they could become part of like recreational activities and kind of, you know, be used as places where communities can come together and, you know, maybe have like local swimming pools, or you could have like water gardens. And then my idea was like how also to keep them safe, that like how you can create basically like 24-hour program around this type of spaces. So that was my thought.
What is a 24-hour program?
So, you know, like how I think a lot of our cities, they suffer from this zoning where you have like, you know, housing zones where they become active only where people come back from work, and the other way around, that people go to work and they are there during the day, and then these places are dead and all the shops close because they only cater to this specific. So I think having like more mixed activities is part of that, so that you know, you can have people who come and go at all hours of the day.
Yes. Yeah, this is great. This is also one of the main pillars of feminist urbanism, to have cities that have people around 24/7, so that you can be seen, you can be heard, and you can, and it's much safer, right, than those ghost neighborhoods where people only go to work.
Yeah, and where you're afraid to walk any other time.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, thank you. Anyone else would like to share?
I would be curious for those of us who live in Helsinki and are familiar with Helsinki. What did you think were how would you prioritize issues in the city regarding climate and feminism?
I have to say that as a Helsinki representative, I was just taking the protection from cold. Yeah. But I'm not that familiar actually with with the whole like social arrangement of the city so much, you know, like in terms of, I moved to Helsinki like 2 days ago, so I don't know.
Oh, did you? From Espoo?
Yeah. So it was more weather oriented actually and very practical.
Yeah.
In terms of sheltering, I think it would be also probably important to provide some sort of shelter that has natural elements or like outdoorsy elements that is more aligned with the general preferences of people here. But I also wasn't sure if you are clicking for what is feasible or what is, you know, desirable in the shelter, if it should really align with the existing status quo or if it is like desirable future. But yeah. And yeah, I think I also mentioned in the customization this note about privacy, which is obviously very tricky to provide, I guess, in a shelter, which is usually limited in space. So that aligning also with the local like character of people, I think having a sense of privacy would be quite good.
Thank you. That's very interesting because my perspective from Barcelona, and I've been doing surveys in the street here, asking similar questions to people, and it's completely different to Helsinki, as you can imagine, because here people are concerned about extreme heat and heat waves much more than extreme cold and cold waves. And in fact, when I ask people about cold, they say, no, it's never cold in Barcelona. So it is true that buildings here are built to be cool. And we do have a winter. So in the winter, it is very cold indoors. And even my apartment is colder. Sometimes it's colder inside than outside in the winter. But it's not really I don't think I would seek shelter from, you know, still I can just put lots of layers of clothing and I'm fine with that. But yes, it is interesting how the climate shelter needs to be really local and based on the needs of the people from that region, right? There's not a recipe that you can just copy and paste in different cities.
I wanted to add an aspect to this cold, because of course the buildings and systems are built that people stay warm in Finland. But now, especially with the possible rising energy prices and whatever shocks in energy supply. I actually visited Georgia more than 10 years ago when they were cut off gas. Like there was no way that I could postpone my visit. And it was quite interesting, the effects of that, the lack of heating for water and indoor spaces and so forth. And I was just there for a week, but, you know, thinking people living throughout the whole winter in cities and so forth. So yeah, but I have to admit that I haven't thought about this for a very long time. It's just the recent developments that made me thought about it.
Interesting, yeah.
I'll just follow on from Eva's point, because that was what struck me. I mean, we've got a country where fuel poverty is already a big deal. And if we find that we're subject to more and very poor insulation, generally, including many single glazed, sorry, I'm leaning in a really weird way. I'll look here and talk. Anyway, we've got single glazed windows, so I'll stop distracting myself. And And the point being that we're now experiencing this hike too, but we're also experiencing it from a position where our insulation has been very poor for a number of years. And I can see that increasingly as weather gets more unreliable, we're going to be much more, I mean, yeah, I'm in the UK, and I'm speaking for the UK more generally, because it's national policy that people are being exposed to such inclement weather, to the extent that we don't have a very sympathetic government. And every time this is raised, they say we're already making payments of this kind, but they're doing nothing that's different from what they were doing. So I can see us in a position where we will need refuges just from our own policies, in a sense.
Thank you. Yeah, that is, I think, as we've been seeing and watching the news, it is something that could happen pretty soon, that gas prices and energy prices will become unaffordable, could become unaffordable for some. And in Spain, it has been crazy. And just on Sunday, we had the second highest power price in history. And I've been talking to people, and some people say, well, in the winter I go to the library, old people mostly, and they spend, you know, the entire afternoon in the library, and they read books, they can talk to each other, they can read the newspaper, and then they save, you know, heating energy. They don't need to use the heater in their houses. Yeah, it is already unaffordable there. It's very sad.
Can I ask? Yes.
Again, sorry, but I mean, it's weird because Britain is such a rich country, so it's very difficult to kind of understand this, but we also have 9 of the 10 poorest areas in Northern Europe. So Belgium has the other one. So it's kind of interesting to think about it in terms not just only of weather, but just as we're recognizing that other people's foreign policy can affect how one lives. Even in just internal policy makes so much difference to this kind of thing, because we have no preparation at the moment at government level for these changes, and a very impoverished 66 million, well, maybe 65.5 million or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. How does intersectionality, can it understand inequality within one kind of grouping? Because sort of we're looking at people who are kind of multiply impacted and probably experiencing axes of multiple deprivation, but also, as you're pointing out, Anne, like the internal inequality of the society is also kind of another sort of pressure onto that.
Exactly. I think intersectionality is a lens that can help us understand these multiple layers of inequality, because if you look from an essentializing perspective, you think, okay, it's rich, let's focus on developing countries. But if you look deeper into the different axes of inequality, you see that there are so many struggles in rich countries. And in Barcelona as well, it can be considered a very rich city, but it has extremely poor neighborhoods that are very vulnerable to not only to climate change, but also to social and economic inequalities. Yes. Sorry, Christina, you were going to say something.
I was just going to ask, because you have been, you were explaining like how Barcelona is trying to create these climate shelters that they are able to have a certain temperature and to provide certain protection. I was wondering if there is like any consideration on like achieving this with passive means, like proper insulation versus like more like energy consuming alternatives such as air conditioning. And whether that has been, because that would be a little bit, I would say, more like, able to absorb the kind of changes in our energy dependency in the long term. but I have no idea whether this is part of the systematic planning of such spaces.
Yes, okay. So Barcelona is tricky because it looks very progressive, what it is doing. And it is identifying places that can be considered climate shelters, that can host people in the event of, climate extremes. But I also ask myself, is it just trying to rebrand existing urban equipment and just place a tag on it and say, look how adaptive we are, how resilient we are? Because they are not really creating or even refurbishing existing places. They are merely adding a tag to the door, to the entrance gate, saying this library is now a climate shelter. You can come here if it is too hot. I think it is, rebranding conversation. Exactly. So it is important to have these spaces, but not to idealize them, because I believe that the city could be doing more, in terms of passive building, so that we end up using less electricity, less energy, less material, and towards more sustainable practices, but also spaces that are not just rebranding, that are really, that offer opportunities, for transformation. And this is what a little bit the brainstorming that we did here, with the hopes of getting some progressive, some innovative ideas of what these spaces are necessary, because climate change is happening. So what else could they offer to people? I don't think I answered your question, but I think it's, Barcelona is showing some very good examples of climate action, but I don't know to what extent they are really transformative, and, or if they're just looking good in the international arena. Yes. Let's see, Eva.
Yeah, but you want to speak out. I think that's a very interesting point as well, about lack of information and not knowing.
Yes. So I was looking into the public shelters, and it's just like, to put it very shortly, I have very little information about them, how to get to them, should I go to them, and so forth. And it's just, what happens to kids if they're at school? Should I pick them up? Would they go somewhere else? What's the food situation? And all these kinds of issues. Not that I think it's highly likely, but yes, exactly. There seems to be very little of this kind of talk. And this could be extended to, I think, other, I guess, more probable scenarios in relation to floods and so forth. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, this came up in Finland and Sweden recently, that because we have these emergency sirens, and they just test them on the first Monday of every month, which would have been today at noon. So the municipalities were just warning the residents that, by the way, we do this all the time. This is a test. So this is going to go off again. So don't panic. And that brought up a lot of questions on social media also, is that, like, is there actually a drill? What happens if the sirens go off? Like, where are we supposed to gather? Is it the reservists who then, like, kind of gather us together and decide what to do, or something like that? So yeah, it's a bit of an extreme scenario, but.
And what is it related to? Is it related to storms?
Finland share. Yeah, it can be for various reasons, like military or natural disaster or things like that. But of course, the discussion now is because Finland shares such a long border with Russia.
Aha, okay. So it's not really related to climate change. These shelters are like nuclear shelters or war shelters that you're talking
exactly,
about.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that is very interesting. I believe we need to go in a couple of minutes, right? But I just wanted to say one final comment, that here people seem to be also unaware of the existence of shelters. Although there are 155 identified places, they don't know about it. And I don't know if they would use one, you know, because there's this lack of knowledge. And I was thinking maybe there should be some, you know, I lived in New Zealand for some time, and there I experienced a very strong earthquake. And I was completely unprepared and I didn't know what to do, but everyone around me knew exactly what to do, when to do, how to do it. You know, they all went under the door frame or under a table because they had been training for that in school throughout their whole lives for years. So perhaps this is what, not to that extent, not so extreme, but perhaps this is what we should be teaching kids as well in schools. You know, if there is a heat wave, there are these spaces that are available for you, and this is what you should do. Or wars or other extreme situations, because otherwise, as Eva, right? Eva was saying, you don't really know they exist even. You don't know what to do, where to go, and you're extremely vulnerable. Sorry, I've been speaking for too long.
No, but that actually does make a lot of sense. I mean, I come from Greece originally, and we do get this training of how to deal with earthquakes since you're like in primary school. So it's somebody that, you know, everyone has gone through this type of, you know, exercises like regularly throughout their whole education. So it would be really, yeah, maybe about integrating like, you know, climate emergency responses to the education would be a really good way to go. But unless there is like maybe one last question or one last comment.
I just want to say how useful it's been to be thinking both about the intersectional nature and also about this idea of refuge. I think it's really powerful. Just thank you very much. And it's going to be a great PhD.
Yay, thank you.
So thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for being with us today and for opening our eyes to this whole new world of like climate refugees or refuge. Yeah, I don't know what is the plural word for
refuges.
Refuges.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your presentation and for this nice thoughtful activity. And thank you all for coming and participating in the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It has been a pleasure. Thank you. Have a great day and happy International Women's Day. Let's keep on fighting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.